This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Get a whole month free at mubi.com/broedeschanel. I have a new podcast called Rehash. I'm co-hosting it with my friend Hannah, and it's all about the social media phenomenons that strike a nerve in our culture, only to be quickly forgotten, but we think are due for a revisiting. We just launched our second season, which explores internet archetypes and the many, many lives they've lived. We're looking at everything from pygmies to gaslighters to himbos. You can find it now wherever you get your podcasts. Go check it out. In 1995, at the peak of the dot-com bubble, when tech startups were beginning to pop up all over Silicon Valley, media theorists Richard Barbrook and Andy Cameron published a searing essay that got everyone real mad. The essay took down what the authors perceived to be a concerning movement taking shape in the Valley, what they called the Californian ideology. Around this time, according to Barbrook and Cameron, there was a growing belief in technological determinism. That is the idea that new technology will correct all of society's wrongs and in turn liberate the people. A belief which very much dictated and confirmed the existence of this new, very successful industry. A generation before, there was a movement of people who were taking predictions about new technology overthrowing big government and business and putting it into practice. Community media activists, who developed new information technologies for the alternative press, community radio stations, homebrew computer clubs, and video collectives. And out of them came a new generation, people Barbrook and Cameron call the virtual class.
Used to be, you either had a blue-collar job or a white-collar job. But nowadays, some of the highest-paying jobs don't require a collar at all. The IT revolution will create over 1 million new jobs in the next year.
Young, laid-back guys with their sweats and slides and hoodies, with galaxy brains and only the future ahead of them. These guys were coming in from the left field of their bedrooms and toppling established industries. They were artists and creatives, designing and innovating their craft. It was all very alluring and edgy. Who wouldn't want to be liberated? Who wouldn't want to live in a glistening tech utopia where everyone is hip but very rich? Well, for Barbrook and Cameron, the issue was that there was a very dangerous contradiction lying at the heart of the Californian ideology. The Californian ideology offers a new way of understanding the lived reality of these digital artisans. On the one hand, these core workers are a privileged part of the labor force. On the other hand, they are the heirs of the radical ideas of the community media activists. The Californian ideology, therefore, simultaneously reflects the disciplines of market economics and the freedoms of hippie artisanship. This bizarre hybrid is only made possible through a nearly universal belief in technological determinism. Basically, what they're saying is that the Californian ideology takes all the hipness and anti-establishment sentiments of the Haight-Ashbury hippies and later the McLuhan-esque tech activists and puts a neoliberal spin on it by promoting a sort of laissez-faire capitalism, that the invisible hand of the free market will simply sort everything out for us. They say, like the labor aristocracy of the last century, core personnel in the media, computing and telecoms industries experience the rewards and insecurities of the marketplace. On the one hand, these digital artisans not only tend to be well paid, but also have considerable autonomy over their pace of work and place of employment. As a result, the cultural divide between the hippie and the organization man has now become rather fuzzy. Of course, those two things don't really go hand in hand. The Haight-Ashbury hippies were certainly not free market capitalists, and were mostly interested in fighting for civil rights, which very much requires centralized government to one degree or another. They also believe in collective rights, which is completely at odds with the extreme individualism of neoliberal capitalism. In fact, we know now that neoliberal free market capitalism actually makes class disparities a whole lot worse, because who gets to participate in the market? Who gets a head start in the race? But because the Californian ideology had such a glossy, hip veneer, its contradictory message could easily go overlooked. And while Barbrook and Cameron's essay made waves, it couldn't stop the virtual class from getting where they needed to be. Out of the virtual class, we got people like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Jack Dorsey, Travis Kalanick, and yes, Mark Zuckerberg. In the earlier years of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg was seen as a somewhat socially inept boy genius. But today, we understand him as something quite different. Few could have predicted that what began as a college social networking site would become an ever-looming threat to privacy, democracy, and, by extension, to us all. Where to even start? In 2012, Facebook conducted psychological tests on 70,000 unaware, non-consenting people to test their reactions to certain words that came up on their feeds. In 2016, they came under fire for featuring an abundance of false news stories surrounding the US presidential election. This also happened with Brexit. During the 2018 Cambridge Analytica scandal, millions of Facebook users' information was harvested for ads used again in the 2016 election. 2018 was a particularly bad year for the company when it was also found out that they had failed to act after the site's algorithms had favored a barrage of hate speech regarding the Rohingya people, which very much contributed to the ethnic cleansing and genocide that took place against them in Myanmar. In 2019, it was revealed that Facebook wanted to track the locations of Android users. It's also been scrutinized for failing to abide by antitrust laws, and it was found that they, along with other Silicon Valley darlings, Amazon, Apple, and Google, have indeed formed monopolies to stamp out competition. They've lobbied in favor of cybersecurity bills and lobbied against privacy legislation. They've allowed white supremacist ads to run wild and shut down progressive activist groups. And with all of this scrutiny, all the lawsuits and investigations, not much has happened. Facebook continues to pose lethal threats to the future of our world, the future of communication, individual and collective rights, and the future of government. But when we look at him today, Mark Zuckerberg is still standing largely unscathed. Which really goes to prove Barbrook and Cameron's warnings. If you're a winner in the free market race, you are almost untouchable. The free market makes it so that big corporations have all the power. And what we're reckoning with today is that very idea, that these tech giants are now so big that even governments must bend to their will, and even benefit from them. That is the invisible hand. In his 2011 critical documentary, which brings together the Californian ideology with the ideas of Ayn Rand, Adam Curtis says this.
The original promise of the Californian ideology was that the computers would liberate us from all the old forms of political control, and we would become Randian heroes, in control of our own destiny. Instead, today, we feel the opposite, that we are helpless components in a global system, a system that is controlled by a rigid logic, that we are powerless to challenge or to change.
So, when The Social Network came out in 2010, a lot of this had not happened yet, or at least the general public was unaware that this is what Facebook had plans of doing. Mark Zuckerberg was still the boy genius, and this film would be the chance to bring attention to who he was as a person. The Social Network is directed by David Fincher and written by Aaron Sorkin, and to this day, it's one of my favorite films. But when I rewatched it last year with my roommates, to my dismay, they both hated it. They felt that the movie propped up Mark Zuckerberg as a romantic hero and glorified the misogynistic, hyper-capitalist culture of Silicon Valley. I couldn't believe it because I had always come away from the film with the exact opposite opinion, that Mark was actually a villain, or at least an anti-hero, and that the film was critiquing this culture of greed and coolness that Silicon Valley espouses. So, who's right? Back in 2010, Scott Foundas wrote for Film Comment that The Social Network was a story about a Gatsby-ish outsider in a world full of wasps, and that, like so many historic achievements in arts, letters, and commerce, Facebook was born of a romantic rejection. But in the past few years, takeaways have been very different. Angela Wattercutter of Wired writes, "The Social Network is something of a decoder ring for popular opinion about Facebook at any given time. Watch it in 2010 and it might feel much darker than anything associated with the company needed to be. Watch it today, it almost seems like the company got off light." Kaitlyn Tiffany of The Verge said that it feels like a relic, a naive movie with quaint, softball critiques of Mark Zuckerberg and his creation. So it seems like opinions about the ethics of the movie have changed over time. The Social Network is a decomposing time capsule, like one that someone put in a river instead of burying underground. I think there are two opposing ways to read the film. The first is that The Social Network is a hero's journey, a classic American dream story. In the hero's journey, Mark starts out as an underdog. Right from the first scene, you can tell that he has some serious insecurities, that he has trouble connecting with other people. You can read this in all the miscommunications in his exchange with Erica. When he runs home to his dorm after being dumped, the score, composed by Trent Reznor, is somber and introverted, which is actually the opposite of the upbeat, driving music that was intended by the script. The film emphasizes the stuffy, elitist, and bookish atmosphere of Harvard, its narrow-minded dean and its antiquated frat culture. The Winklevoss twins embody this atmosphere. At one point, they literally describe themselves as Harvard men.
Because we're gentlemen of Harvard, This is Harvard, where you don't plant stories and you don't sue people.
They're the perfect foils for Mark. Gentlemanly and by the books, well-dressed, bureaucratic, and the physical opposites of him in every way. Mark is an outsider to the perceived establishment. There are many moments we also see that Mark's best friend Eduardo, who is now waging a massive lawsuit against him, can't keep up with the pace at which their business is growing.
I'm in New York riding subways 14 hours a day, trying to find advertisers.
And how's it going so far?
He's making misstep after misstep, proposing to put ads on the site which will dampen its bohemian edge. He's taking it to all the wrong investors, he's not listening to Mark's vision, and when he makes the final fatal decision to freeze the company's bank account, effectively putting the company at risk of collapse, his share is fairly diluted. People get hurt in the process, but that's what it takes to get ahead. This willingness to cut people out, even potentially ratting out his mentor Sean Parker, is what gives Mark an edge. And his dogged fixation on that singular vision of coolness is how he achieves his dream. He starts out with nothing and through hard work ends up with everything. At the end of the film, we watch Mark sit on his computer and refresh Erica's Facebook page to see if she's accepted his friend request, ultimately solidifying the message that he is just a human, in search of love and connection. This is what made some critics mad. As Tiffany asserts, film critics made the understandable mistake of identifying Zuckerberg as powerful in only an antiquated sense of the term, but Sorkin made the worse one of letting him off the hook as a kid who's been hurt. The Social Network is still a useful, enjoyable memento, but it's clearly written with very little appreciation of its own stakes, and a lot of reverence for the brilliance of its central figure. Under this reading, the film serves as propaganda for the Californian ideology. Mark is an outsider. He creates something out of nothing from the walls of his dorm room. He wears sweats and he breaks things. He also breaks the rules, hacking Harvard's system, performing a sleight of hand on the Winklevi, dunking on lawyers in the courtroom, and not listening to anyone other than Sean Parker. Parker is the ultimate embodiment of the countercultural mask of Silicon Valley. He's everything Mark wants to be. Good with women, smooth talking, revered, and most importantly, cool. A rule-breaking bad boy who's already won the free market game. This is a valid reading of the film. But the other reading of the film is that, if you were to distill it down to a character study, it's a critique of the myth of male genius, of the so-called self-made man.
You are probably going to be a very successful computer person, but you're going to go through life thinking that girls don't like you because you're a nerd. I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that that won't be true. It'll be because you're an asshole.
The self-made man has been a figure of American literature and media for centuries. It makes up the core tenet of the American dream. In The Myths That Made America, Heike Paul identifies the self-made man as a myth which affirms an ideology of expressive individualism, as well as individual achievement and success that conceptualizes the pursuit of happiness as the pursuit of property. But he's clear on his stance that by claiming that self-making also contributes to the greater common good, hegemonic versions of this powerful myth, or fairy tale, of social mobility still very successfully obscure its role in legitimizing and perpetuating immense structural social inequalities. Sound familiar? This is the neoliberal side of the Californian ideology. What's most important to note about the myth of the self-made man, or the American dream, is that they're myths, dreams. They're not real, they are not attainable for us all. Paul is clear on this idea. He criticizes Bill Gates and his contemporaries' blind romanticization of the self-made man. Gates' reference to Adam Smith, the forefather of neoliberal capitalism, attests to his own global neoliberal capitalist vision, exceeding the nation-state and the national market, in which there are supposedly only winners, as everybody profits from the new democratizing technologies and the workings of Smith's proverbial invisible hand. Gates thus romanticizes the conditions of consumption and the role of consumers and entrepreneurs, while obscuring the conditions of production and the economic vulnerability of those involved in it. Our society upholds male geniuses like Gates, Jobs, and Zuckerberg as liberators and prophets, when in reality there are thousands, millions of people's backs they stepped on to get to where they are. This myth has been perpetuated in American media for a very long time. What's interesting, though, is that Paul describes the Social Network as being critical of Mark Zuckerberg. I personally agree. If you were to look at the film not as an individual success story, but as a courtroom drama with a number of perspectives, Mark doesn't look so great. From the get-go in his scene with Erica, he's deeply insecure and blindly ambitious. He isn't a cool outsider who doesn't care about fitting in, but a guy who desperately wants to be a part of the cool clique. So desperate that he's willing to degrade his female classmates to make a name for himself on campus. He's also a bad friend. There are so many moments in the film that I actually caught on my last viewing, where Mark belittles and ignores Eduardo.
I made the second cut. That's good. You should be proud of that right there. Don't worry if you don't make it any further.
He's also easily influenced by Sean Parker, who, if you look at him from Eduardo's perspective, is a massive loser. He has no money, he's paranoid, and truly, what kind of 25-year-old parties with undergrads? If you were to look at the film as a character study, it's kind of the anti-American Dream movie. We would be foolish not to acknowledge and even marvel at how exponentially Facebook blew up, which is what the movie does. But to me, it plays out as a thriller, with its angsty score and subdued high-contrast visuals. One where Mark's rule-breaking is really just breaches of privacy and betrayals of trust at every single step of the way. One in which Mark is never really a victim, and one that shows him alone and miserable once his dream is achieved. Because people like Mark and Sean have no ideology. Their ideology is to be cool and to make as much money as humanly possible.
$1 million isn't cool. You know what's cool?
You? $1 billion.
And because of that, there's nothing left for them once they get it. Sean got it, lost it, and now just simmers in his lost hopes and dreams. Mark got it, but he can't really be happy because he's betrayed everyone to get there. And truly, anyone who really achieves the ultimate American dream, anyone who pursues a capitalistic channel to achieve it, will end up exploiting and betraying hundreds, if not thousands, of people to do so. Mark Zuckerberg is an exceptional case because, in his endless pursuit of greatness, he has now betrayed hundreds of millions, billions even. This is the myth of male genius. At this point in time, with Zuckerberg being who he is, the social network plays out like a bit of a Rorschach test. Some people see a hero's journey, some people see the myth. But for the life of me, I couldn't figure out just exactly why the film, which is an objectively very well-made film, could be read so differently. Until I came across two interviews. The interviews, conducted by film critic Emanuel Levy, are with Aaron Sorkin and David Fincher respectively. And this is what I found. In Sorkin's interview, it's obvious that he wanted the film to be a courtroom drama. After all, that's where he made his mark.
You can't handle the truth!
He based the film on courtroom depositions from Zuckerberg's numerous early lawsuits, some anonymous interviews he did with people close to the case, and also a book called The Accidental Billionaires by Ben Mesrick, which is all about the lawsuits and also the inception of Facebook, and which was written under the consultation of not Mark Zuckerberg, but Eduardo Saverin. Sorkin initially describes Mark as an antagonist, and says,
I want to write the character as if he's making his case to God as to why he should be allowed into heaven. People aren't all good or all bad, and certainly Mark isn't all either one, but there's only one person on Earth who could have done the thing that he did. Mark is a guy with both a utopian social vision and a gigantic amount of pure, imaginative technical ability, and who is very driven to do what he's about to do. He has the vision and the brains, but people and things get destroyed along the way.
Sorkin doesn't think Mark is an evil supervillain, but he expresses a wariness about Facebook and the internet. He thinks the internet is actually collapsing human connection, even though its social networking sites purport to do the opposite.
The failure of Mark's utopian ideal, that success will solve all of his problems, when, of course it doesn't, that a social networking site will bring us all close together when it's actually done the opposite, is what I wanted to write about.
But to be a good writer is to have empathy for your characters.
It's harder to like Mark, and I want it to be hard to like Mark. It can't be a story if we don't care if he lives or dies, so I want it to be hard to like Mark, but I also want us to like him, even if we're not certain if we should.
Sorkin admits that he sees himself in Mark. The Mark that he sees is someone who feels like a loser, someone who wants to sit with the cool kids but doesn't know how. His response to this feeling is anger, which informs a lot of his decisions in the film, and which he uses as rocket fuel to drive his ambitions. And he says something here which really underscores why the movie reads to me and so many others as a critique of the Californian ideology. He says that the real journey of the movie is the journey from hacker to CEO. For me, that's a journey from someone who positions themselves as an establishment outsider to someone who becomes an establishment dictator. And to be a CEO is to have bloodied hands. Like Sorkin says,
nobody likes a 26-year-old billionaire.
When he says this, he means it with empathy for Mark's loneliness, but I read it like this: nobody should like a 26-year-old billionaire. And then there's David Fincher's interview. In both interviews, Levy locates a lot of thematic disagreements between Fincher and Sorkin, and you'll see why. From the way Fincher talks about his film and about Mark, you can tell he's very much a proponent, at least back in 2010, of the Californian ideology. Where Sorkin is wary of Facebook and actually cites a lot of its privacy issues even back then, Fincher is reverent of it.
It's that whole condescending thing of having to ask adults for permission because the perception is that you're too young to do it for yourself. And that's why I understood Mark's frustration. You have a vision of what this thing should be, and everyone wants to tell you, oh, well, you're young. You'll see soon enough.
That whole sentiment of not needing permission very much echoes that countercultural aspect of the Californian ideology. He says that this is where Mark's anger stems from, and this is the anger Fincher says he relates to. He speaks of Mark in artistic, creative terms too. Here,
I didn't necessarily relate to it, to be honest. I don't really know any hackers. But I saw Mark as kind of like Banksy. I saw him as this outsider graffiti artist, somebody who saw himself as a threat to society in almost a fun way. I understand that there's this world of people who look at intrusion and dissemination and other ideas of this sort, but I didn't really relate to that as much as I related to the idea of a graffiti artist.
And again here,
I think it's ironic that creativity has to happen on the fringe. It has to. Creative change happens on the fringe of everything. It's always on the edge, it's in the margins, and then it's adopted by the herd. And I think it's ironic that a guy who seems to have issues with being able to communicate with other people has invented one of the greatest tools for communicating with people.
But doesn't Sorkin feel the exact opposite? That Facebook actually ruined people's ability to communicate? That right there is a fundamental tension. Fincher truly believes in the products that these tech entrepreneurs, the virtual class, has created. Just look at the way he talks about Steve Jobs.
In the information age, Steve Jobs has a relationship with not only his product designers, but with the people who are buying his product for more money than competing versions of it. That's because of the relationship that he has to the design, the relationship that he has to the message of it all, the relationship that he has to the empowerment of owning these things.
And there you go. The empowerment of owning these things. There's the ideology. And that's where you see the negative readings. He directly espouses the DIY idea of the tech utopia, leaving out the fact that Steve Jobs exploited thousands of people in factories across the world to get Apple to where it is today. Where Sorkin finds it sad, Fincher is ultimately neutral on the idea that you have to step on other people to get ahead. Where Sorkin is wary of Facebook, Fincher is awed by it. His sexy scores and thrilling, suspenseful montages could make Mark look incredibly cool, regardless of what he's saying at any given time. This is why the film is a Rorschach test. Sorkin and Fincher both see some of themselves in Mark and think he's an impressive individual, but where Sorkin's dialogue indicts, or at least criticizes, Fincher's camera exonerates. What happens when you get two very talented, very adept artists painting a portrait of a deeply destructive person? Fincher himself has a very neutral approach to filmmaking.
I'm interested in just presenting something and letting people decide for themselves what they want to look at. I look for patterns in coverage and for ways to place the camera to see what you need to see, from as far away as possible. I try to remain semi-detached. I want to present the material without becoming too involved.
And while this is made for some absolutely incredible, very morally complex films, it's also led to some issues. By that I mean David Fincher's filmography has a tendency to enter the cultural zeitgeist with an opposite message of what its source material intended. Think of Fight Club, a movie intended to critique late capitalism and hypermasculinity, only to be hyper-commodified and end up as the cultural signifier of dude bros everywhere. Think of Gone Girl, which was written by Gillian Flynn with a strong feminist subtext, only for the film to be weaponized against women for being calculating man-eaters. While it's not my personal reading of the film, I can see why people would be worried that the extreme sophistication and coolness of Fincher's approach to The Social Network, especially because he was actually quite inspired by Zuckerberg at the time, could be interpreted as romanticization, and could have potentially influenced aspiring tech bros at the time to get out there and betray everyone around them in pursuit of the tech utopia. And even Sorkin, who wrote an absolutely incredible adapted script, even winning an Oscar for it, romanticized Mark a bit. Framing the movie through his rejection by Erica definitely places it within that territory. As it turns out though, these are the things that make The Social Network a very, very good movie. It's thrilling, it's beautiful to look at, impeccably scored and acted, its themes and characters are complex and nuanced. To me, it's a modern masterpiece, one of the most important cultural artifacts of our time, the great film of the information age. But is there a line to which we can build empathy for a person who is actively destroying our world? When the movie was made, the line between Mark Zuckerberg and David Fincher, and by extension us, was much thinner. But as Zuckerberg's megalomania grows, the line thickens. Can we see humanity in people like Zuckerberg or Dorsey or Jobs or Gates or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, where they so easily and systematically eviscerate ours? As of now, the social network gives us one very frightening answer. Yes. I want to give a shout out to Mubi for sponsoring this video. Mubi is a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from all around the globe. It's for lovers of great cinema and those who don't know they love great cinema yet. Because the beauty of Mubi is that it exposes you to artful, thought-provoking, and innovative films you would never think to watch. If you're looking for something off the beaten path, Lithuanian filmmaker Emilia Skarnilait's documentary Burial wordlessly catalogs the careful dismantling of the Ignalina power plant in Lithuania, a sister plant of Chernobyl. Skarnilait's camera zeroes in on images of new and ancient technology, juxtaposing them to excavate the systems that threaten our planet. With its immersive visuals and droning soundscapes, Burial's silence is deafening. You can find Burial right now on Mubi as part of their current Artist in Focus spotlight on Skarnilait. Discover the best of cinema at your fingertips, streaming anytime, anywhere. You can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/broedeschanel. That's mubi.com/broedeschanel for a whole month of great cinema for free. Special thank you to Louis Osta, Syed Hassan, Malpertui, Morgan, Cooper Stimpson, Nadia C., Nick, Jenny Eller, J. Frost McFinnigan, Gabriel M., The Wiz Daniel, Connor O'Keefe, Sharma, Tristan Donahoe, D.H. Klein, Daniel Sardunas, Pete Holland, Carrie Gavin, and Kelly Wolf for supporting this channel.